"You're too good for me," the peasant woman whispered. But then, before the whole village, the prince dropped to his knees. The market square fell silent. A muddy peasant girl, and the heir to the throne? The church bells tolled, hooves thundered, and whispers spread like wildfire through the streets. At first, it looked like a miracle royal kindness in a world by pride. But behind the stone walls of the castle, darker voices rose. A ruthless noble saw his chance, twisting lies into chains that could destroy her. She was dragged before the court, accused of witchcraft and treason. He was ordered never to see her again, but what secret from her family's past could turn shame into honor? And when love dares to defy a crown, will it be crushed beneath the weight of tradition, or rise to change a kingdom forever? Comment below and tell me where in the world you're joining from. And if this story made you pause for a moment, hit that subscribe button for more thunder. Cracked across the darkening sky as rain lashed the small bohemian village's marketplace. Market vendors scrambled to protect their wares with oilcloths, while villagers huddled beneath the sagging awnings of wooden stalls. The spring storm had come suddenly, turning the dirt streets into rivers of mud. Clara pulled her worn shawl tighter, helping old widow Meyer secure her vegetables from the driving rain. The sound of pounding hooves and shouting men cut through the storm's roar. The royal hunting party. Someone cried out in alarm. Horses burst into the marketplace, their riders resplendent in rich hunting clothes despite the weather. Villagers scattered, pressing themselves against walls and stalls. Through the chaos, Clara spotted little Anna, frozen in terror as the horses thundered toward her. Without hesitation, Clara rushed forward, snatching the child from harm's way. A massive black stallion reared up before them, its hooves pawing at the air. Acting on instinct, Clara reached out and grabbed its bridle, speaking soft words to calm the frightened beast. Her heart hammered in her chest as she realized whose horse she held. Prince Lucas himself sat atop the stallion, his fine clothes now soaked through. Their eyes met, and Clara felt the world grow still, despite the chaos around them. His eyes were kind, she noticed, not cold and distant as she'd expected from nobility. They held a warmth that seemed to reach out to her. Gasps rippled through the crowd. No commoner dared touch a royal mount, let alone meet the crown prince's gaze so directly. Clara felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment as she realized her grave breach of etiquette, to everyone's astonishment. Prince Lucas smoothly dismounted, his boots splashing in the mud. He knelt beside little Anna, who still trembled in Clara's protective embrace. "There now, little one," he said gently, pulling a sweet from his pocket. "You've been very brave. Are you hurt?" Anna shook her head, her eyes wide as she accepted the treat. The prince's kindness seemed to wash away her fear, and a small smile tugged at her lips. "Your Highness," Clara murmured, trying to curtsy despite still holding Anna. "Forgive my presumption with your horse. I only wish to protect the child." Lucas stood, rain streaming down his face. "You showed great courage," he declared, loud enough for all to hear. "I thank you for preventing what could have been a terrible tragedy." His voice carried authority, but also genuine warmth that made Clara's heart flutter. The watching villagers muttered in amazement. Never had they seen a noble, let alone the crown prince, show such consideration to common folk. Some of the other riders looked distinctly uncomfortable at the prince's behavior. "Please," Lucas said, "allow me to see you both safely home." He signaled to a servant to take charge of his horse, then offered his arm to Clara in a gesture usually reserved for noble ladies. Clara hesitated, acutely aware of the scandal this would cause. "Your Highness, I couldn't possibly—" "I insist," he said softly. His smile, gentle but determined. The walk to her cottage seemed both endless and far too short. Torchlight from windows cast flickering shadows as they passed, while villagers peeked from behind curtains at the extraordinary sight. Anna skipped ahead, apparently recovered from her fright and clutching her royal sweet Dot at Clara's door. She finally found her voice again. "You're too good to me, Your Highness," she whispered, overwhelmed by his kindness and attention. "A common woman like myself doesn't deserve such courtesy." To her shock, Lucas knelt before her in the mud, taking her rough, work-worn hand in his. "My lady," he said, his voice full of emotion, "you have shown more true nobility today than many who fill my father's court. Courage, compassion, and quick thinking in the face of danger, these are the qualities that matter, not accidents of birth." Around them, villagers gathered at a respectful distance, torches illuminating their awestruck faces as they whispered among themselves about the shocking scene. Some spoke of scandal, others of romance, but all knew they were witnessing something extraordinary, a moment when the rigid barriers between noble and common seemed to waver like the torch flames. In the rain, dawn broke over the village with golden fingers of light pushing through the clouds. The storm had passed, leaving puddles that reflected the morning sky like scattered mirrors. Clara's wooden bucket swung at her side as she made her way to the village well, her boots squishing in the mud from yesterday's downpour. Even before she reached the well, she heard the excited chatter of village women. They fell silent as she approached, their eyes following her every move. Clara kept her head down, focusing on tying her rope to the bucket. "Did you see how the prince himself helped her home?" One woman whispered loudly enough for Clara to hear. "Never in all my years. Above herself, if you ask me," another responded with a sniff. "Common folk shouldn't catch royal eyes." "No good ever comes of it." Clara's cheeks burned, but she continued lowering her bucket into the well. The rope felt rough against her calloused hands as she worked. "I think it was brave, young Mary." The baker's daughter piped up. "She saved little Thomas from being trampled, didn't she?" As the women debated, Brother Marcus, a traveling monk known for his wisdom, approached the well. His brown robes were dusty from the road, and his kind eyes crinkled at the corners as he looked at Clara. "Child," he said softly, waiting until the other women moved away. "I heard talk of yesterday's events. Take care. The court is not like our simple village. Their smiles hide daggers, and their sweet words often carry poison." Clara pulled her now full bucket from the well. "I know my place, Brother Marcus." "Yesterday it was nothing more than a moment of chaos in the storm." The monk shook his head slowly. "Court envy is like a weed that chokes the garden. I've seen it destroy good, honest folk who caught the wrong eye or the wrong favor. Be watchful." Meanwhile, in the castle's grand dining hall, Prince Lucas sat at the long table with his father, the king, and various members of court. Candles flickered in ornate holders, casting dancing shadows on the tapestried walls. The prince pushed his roasted pheasant around his plate, his mind clearly elsewhere. "The common folk speak well of your actions yesterday, my son," the king said, his deep voice carrying authority even in casual conversation. Though perhaps kneeling to a peasant was excessive, several courtiers tittered behind their hands. Lucas set down his silver fork with careful precision. "She showed courage and quick thinking, father. Such virtues deserve recognition, regardless of birth. Pretty peasant girls often show such virtues." Count Drazel commented smoothly from his place near the king. His eyes glittered with calculation as he watched the prince's reaction. "Though I find the grace and refinement of noble-born ladies far more suitable for admiration. My daughter Beatrice, for instance." Lucas's jaw tightened. "Courage and kindness need no title, Count Drazel." The count dabbed his lips with a fine linen napkin, exchanging meaningful glances with other nobles. "Indeed, your highness. Though one might suggest that future kings need suitable companions." Whispers rustled through the hall like autumn leaves. "Most improper," an elderly duchess muttered. A prince, kneeling in the mud before a commoner. The king frowned at his son, but Lucas met his gaze steadily. "I would rather kneel in honest mud than stand in dishonest luxury," he declared, rising from his seat. The hall fell silent as twilight painted the sky in purple and gold. Lucas changed into simple riding clothes. His trusted servant helped him secure a plain brown cloak that would hide his fine clothing beneath. The prince checked his reflection in a polished metal mirror, ensuring nothing would reveal his true identity. "Your Highness," his servant whispered nervously. "The roads are dangerous after dark." Lucas mounted his horse, a simple bay rather than his usual white stallion. "Some risks are worth taking," he replied softly, thinking of Clara's gentle strength and honest eyes. As he urged his horse toward the village, the first stars began to twinkle overhead, witnesses to a prince's secret journey to find a humble woman who had captured his thoughts. The last rays of sunset painted the village in shades of amber when a soft knock echoed through Clara's humble cottage. Her heart skipped as she opened the door to find Prince Lucas standing there, his fine clothes exchanged for a simple riding cloak. "Your Highness?" she gasped, dropping into a hasty curtsy. "You cannot be here. Please," he said, glancing over his shoulder at the empty lane. "I had to ensure the child was well after yesterday's incident." Clara wrung her hands in her apron. "Little Maria is fine, Your Highness. She's safe at home with her mother. But you must go if anyone sees you here." Despite her protests, Lucas stepped inside. The single candle on her table cast dancing shadows on the whitewashed walls. "I've thought of nothing else since yesterday," he admitted. "Your courage, your kindness, they've touched my heart." "My lord," Clara whispered, keeping a proper distance between them. "Such words will only bring us pain. You are the crown prince? I am but a village woman." "This cannot be." "Cannot be what?" Lucas asked softly. "Two souls speaking honestly? Is that so forbidden?" The candle flickered as Clara sank into a chair, her legs weak. "Scandal could destroy us both. The nobles would never accept it, and the villagers already whisper." But Lucas pulled up the other rough wooden chair, his eyes earnest in the dim light. "Tell me of your life, Clara, your hopes, your dreams. I wish to know the real woman who shows more nobility than any lady at court." Hours slipped by like water, through fingers as they talked. Clara spoke of tending her small garden, of helping sick neighbors, of reading borrowed books by candlelight. Lucas shared tales of palace intrigues, of the weight of duty, of longing for something real beyond the glittering masks of court. Though mere feet separated them, neither moved to bridge the gap. Yet something deeper than touch passed between them, understanding, kinship, the first tender shoots of affection taking root. "My faith sustains me," Clara said softly. "When life seems too heavy to bear alone, do you not find peace in prayer, Your Highness?" "Lucas," he corrected gently. "And yes, though differently perhaps. I find my peace in moments like this simple truth between two souls." The eastern sky was turning pearl gray when Lucas finally rose to leave. "I cannot promise I won't return," he said, pausing at the door. "Then I cannot promise I won't pray for your safety each time you do," Clara replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Dawn was breaking as Lucas rode through the castle gates. His valet Thomas was already waiting in the stables, worry creasing his weathered face. "My lord," Thomas hissed, quickly taking the reins. "The morning guards noticed your absence. I told them you had risen early to ride, but..." He glanced anxiously at the castle windows above. "You're a good man, Thomas," Lucas said, clasping his shoulder. "I know I place you in a difficult position. I serve you first." "My prince," Thomas replied, though fear flickered in his eyes. "But others serve different masters. Please be careful." Sunday morning found Clara kneeling in the village church, morning light streaming through the high windows. The wooden pew creaked as others shifted to stare at her. She could feel their gazes like physical things, some curious, some disapproving, some gleaming with malicious gossip. But as the priest's Latin prayers washed over her, Clara closed her eyes and pressed her hands together. The familiar words brought comfort, yet new emotions stirred beneath her quiet prayers, a warmth in her chest when she recalled Lucas's gentle voice, a flutter in her stomach at the memory of his kind eyes. "Lord, forgive me," she whispered, head bowed. But even as she sought forgiveness for these forbidden feelings, her heart treasured them like precious jewels, safely hidden from the judging eyes around her. The fresh morning dew still clung to the grass when a cloaked figure made his way through the village 4 days later. Prince Lucas had traded his fine garments for the rough wool of a commoner, his golden rings left behind in his chambers. Only his confident stride might have betrayed his noble bearing to watchful eyes. Clara stood in her small garden, gathering dried herbs when she heard footsteps approach. Her breath caught at the sight of him, But the prince pressed a finger to his lips with a playful smile. "Good morrow, miss," he called out in a local accent, loud enough for any passers-by to hear. "Might you need help gathering firewood this fine morning?" Understanding dawned in her eyes. "That would be most kind, good sir," she replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. Several villagers passed by, paying them no mind, just another helpful neighbor offering assistance. They walked together toward the forest edge, maintaining a respectful distance until the trees shielded them from view. Only then did Lucas's shoulders relax, his royal posture giving way to an easier bearing. "You should not risk coming here," Clara chided softly, though her heart lifted at his presence. "I find palace life rather dull of late," he said, gathering fallen branches. "The endless ceremonies, the false flattery, how refreshing to spend time with someone who speaks truth instead of what they think I wish to hear." Clara could not help but laugh at his dramatic sigh. Surely court life cannot be so terrible with all its fine clothes and fancy balls. You would be surprised. He balanced a stack of wood in his arms. "Tell me instead about your life here." "Your family?" Her smile faded slightly. "There is little to tell. My father served in the army years ago. He died defending the northern borders, though few remember his sacrifice now." Lucas stopped, his expression grave. "I would remember. Tell me about him." As they gathered wood, Clara shared memories of her father, his strong hands showing her how to tend herbs, his quiet prayers each morning, his proud smile when he wore his uniform. Lucas listened intently, asking questions that showed genuine interest rather than mere politeness. "He sounds like a true noble," Lucas said softly. "More so than many who claim the title by birth alone." Back at her cottage, they sorted the wood together, their conversation flowing easily between serious matters and gentle teasing. Lucas spoke of his own dreams, not of power or glory, but of making real changes to help common folk like her father. "Sometimes I wonder if there might be a different path," he admitted, watching her stack the firewood. "One where birth need not determine destiny." Meanwhile, within the castle walls, darker currents stirred. Count Drazel paced his chambers, a letter clutched in his hand. 3 gold coins clinked in the palm of a nervous kitchen boy. "You will report the prince's every movement to me," the count instructed. "Where he goes, when he returns, any unusual behavior." His thin lips curved in a smile that held no warmth. "Your family's debts will be forgotten in return." The boy nodded, clutching the coins close. Already, whispers spread among the servants, like autumn leaves in the wind. The prince's empty chambers during odd hours, his simple clothes appearing in the laundry, the mud on his boots when he had not officially left the castle dot as evening approached. Lucas knew he must return before his absence was noted. Moonlight silvered the path as he prepared to leave Clara's cottage. "Thank you," he said softly, "for sharing your father's story, for sharing your truth." Clara stood in her doorway, watching him adjust his plain cloak. Her heart felt both fuller and heavier than before. As his figure disappeared into the shadows, she knelt beside her bed. Hands clasped tightly. "Lord above," she whispered, "watch over him on his journey home. Guard his noble heart from those who would not understand. And please," her voice caught, "protect my own heart from hoping for what cannot be." The moon sailed high overhead, witness to both her prayer and the prince's careful return to his gilded cage, while in the servants' quarters. Coins changed hands and whispers grew louder. Dot morning bells echoed through the village as an elderly monk in weathered robes made his way down the dusty street. His eyes, bright despite his years, settled on Clara as she arranged fresh bread in her window. She offered him a warm smile and a fresh loaf, as was her custom with traveling holy men. "God's blessings, child," the monk said, accepting the bread. He studied her face with growing recognition. "You have your father's eyes." Clara paused, her heart quickening. "You knew my father?" The monk nodded, his voice dropping to ensure privacy. "Indeed. I was there the day he saved our king's life in the Battle of White Mountain. Stefan was his name, a brave soldier who threw himself between His Majesty and an enemy's blade. He touched the cross at his neck. The wound that took him later should have earned your family a title, Clara's. Hands trembled as she invited him inside her modest cottage. The monk settled onto a wooden chair as she poured fresh water into a clay cup. "Why has no one spoken of this before?" she whispered. "Many records were lost in those chaotic days," the monk explained, his eyes kind. "But I never forgot. When I heard talk of you and the prince," he smiled gently. "Perhaps heaven itself guides this path." After the monk departed, Clara sat at her small table, heart full of newfound hope. With trembling fingers, she pulled out a sheet of carefully hoarded paper and her father's old quill. The words flowed carefully, each one chosen with delicate precision. "Your Highness, a traveling monk brings news that may interest you regarding my father's service to the crown. If you would hear more, I remain your humble servant. K." She sealed it with a drop of wax and sought out Thomas, the postwriter she had known since childhood. His honest face and years of faithful service made him the only one she could trust with such a precious cargo. "This must reach the prince's own hands," she whispered, pressing a copper coin, a week's savings, into his palm. Thomas nodded solemnly, tucking the letter safely away in his private chambers. Prince Lucas broke the simple seal with eager fingers. His heart raced at the familiar handwriting. After reading the brief message twice, he glanced around his opulent room before selecting an ornate prayer book from his shelf. The letter disappeared between its gilt pages. Safe among prayers and psalms, hope ballooned in his chest. This news of Clara's father might help sway the king. Lucas began drafting notes, planning his approach. He would need to choose his moment carefully, present the facts with both reason and passion. That evening, hundreds of candles blazed in the great hall as nobles gathered for a feast. Lucas sat at the high table, watching servants pour rich red wine into golden goblets. His father, the king, rose to his feet, commanding immediate silence. "My lords and ladies," the king's voice carried across the hall. "Tonight we celebrate Count Drizel's lovely daughter, who has so graciously joined our court." Lucas's fingers tightened around his goblet as the count's daughter lowered her eyes demurely, her elaborate silk gown rustling. She was everything a noble bride should be: accomplished, beautiful, and most importantly, of proper birth. Count Drizel watched the prince with calculating eyes, as nobles raised their glasses in the toast. The count's subtle smile spoke of schemes already in motion, of alliances being carefully woven. Lucas lifted his own glass mechanically, his mind on the letter hidden in his prayer book. The monk's revelation felt like a gift from Providence itself, but he would need to act soon. Very soon, as the toast ended and the feast began in earnest, he watched his father laugh at something Count Drizel had said, knowing that time was slipping away like sand through an hourglass. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Count Drizel's study as he held Clara's letter to the light, a cold smile playing across his thin lips. His paid informant had intercepted it from the royal postwriter, who now lay bound in a cellar below. The count's eyes narrowed as he read the simple, heartfelt words meant only for Prince Lucas. "My dearest friend," he read aloud mockingly, "my prayers are with you always, as is my heart." He turned to his scribe. "Add these lines about enchantments and midnight rituals. Make it seem as though she confesses to witchcraft between the innocent phrases." The scribe's quill scratched against fresh parchment, carefully mimicking Clara's hand while weaving in dark implications. Count Drizel watched with satisfaction as the forged letter took shape, transforming a pure expression of love into something sinister. "The common folk have always feared witches," he mused, sealing the altered letter with red wax. "And nothing frightens nobles more than a peasant with power over their precious heir. Within hours..." Count Drizel swept into the grand audience chamber, his dark velvet cloak billowing behind him. The king sat upon his throne. Advisors gathered close as evening light filtered through stained glass windows. "Your Majesty," Drizel announced, his voice echoing, "I come bearing grave news of treachery against the crown." He held up the letter, its seal now broken. "Evidence of dark arts used against Prince Lucas by the village woman who has caught his eye." Whispers erupted among the courtiers. The king leaned forward, his face troubled. These are serious accusations, Count Drazel. What proof have you? Her own words betray her, sire. Drazel began reading selected passages, cleverly twisted to suggest midnight meetings and forbidden rituals. She has bewitched our prince, using common magic to turn his head from suitable matches. The king's advisors huddled close, speaking in urgent tones. Though clearly reluctant, the king could not ignore such charges. Not with his son's reputation and safety at stake. Send the guards, he commanded finally, his voice heavy. Bring her to face these accusations properly. As twilight descended over the village, iron-shod hooves thundered down the narrow streets. Soldiers in royal livery surrounded Clara's modest cottage, torchlight glinting off their weapons. By order of the king, their captain announced. Pounding on her door, Dakela Ayar emerged, confusion turning to fear as rough hands seized her arms. What is this? She asked, her voice steady despite her terror. Charges of witchcraft and conspiracy against the crown, the captain replied coldly. The commotion drew villagers from their homes. They gathered in the square, watching in horror as Clara was dragged toward a waiting carriage. She's innocent, called the baker's wife. Clara's a good Christian woman. You can't take her, shouted another, but none dared step forward against armed royal guards. The elderly monk, who had recognized her father, tried to intervene. This is a grave mistake. Her father saved the king's life. But the soldiers pushed him aside, forcing Clara into the carriage. She held her head high, though tears gleamed in her eyes. Tell Prince Lucas, she called out to the monk. Tell him I kept faith. The carriage door slammed shut, and the horses lurched forward. Through the window, Clara caught glimpses of her neighbors' faces. Some fearful, others angry, all helpless to stop what was happening. High above in the castle, Prince Lucas gripped the stone balustrade of his private balcony, watching the royal guard escort the carriage through the gates below. His knuckles whitened with barely contained fury as he recognized the count's hand in this cruel plot. I will not let them harm you, he whispered into the gathering dusk, though Clara was too far to hear. His shoulders shook with helpless rage, knowing that any rash action now would only make things worse for her. The carriage disappeared into the torch-lit courtyard below, bearing Clara toward what promised to be a harsh tribunal. Lucas remained motionless on his balcony, his mind racing to find a way to save the woman he had grown to love, while protecting her from the deadly game of court politics that now threatened to destroy them both. The great hall, justice loomed cold and forbidding. Its stone walls hung with ancient tapestries that seemed to watch with stern disapproval. Clara stood alone before the raised tribunal bench, her simple wool dress a stark contrast to the sea of silk and velvet that surrounded her. Afternoon light filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Count Drazel sat among the assembled nobles, his satisfied smirk barely concealed behind a facade of grave concern. One by one, witnesses he had carefully prepared stepped forward to spin their tales of deceit. I saw her gathering. Herbs by moonlight, declared a nervous-looking farmer, his eyes darting to Count Drazel for approval. Strange herbs, your lordships. Not proper cooking sorts. A merchant's wife wrung her hands as she testified. The prince seemed different after taking water from her well. Distracted-like, as if under a spell, Clara stood straight back through it all, though her heart ached at each false word. She had expected lies, but their cruelty still stung. The assembled nobles muttered and shook their heads, while several clergy members crossed themselves. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors burst open with a thunderous crash. Prince Lucas strode in, his boots echoing on the stone floor, face flushed with anger. This is a mockery of justice, he declared, his voice ringing through the chamber. I will not stand silent. Well, you will stand silent. My son, the king's command cut through the air like a sword. He rose from his throne-like chair at the center of the tribunal bench, his expression stern. The law must take its course, even for princes. Perhaps especially for princes. Lucas's hands clenched into fists, but years of training held him in check. His eyes met Clara's across the chamber, filled with helpless anguish. She gave him the smallest shake of her head, begging him not to risk more for her sake. The Chief Justice, an elderly man with keen eyes, cleared his throat. This tribunal requires time to consider the evidence presented. Until our judgment is reached, the accused shall be held under guard in the castle kitchens. Where her skills may be of use, 2 guards stepped forward to escort Clara from the chamber. As she passed Count Drazel, she heard his soft whisper, "A fitting place for a peasant witch." The castle kitchens were vast and warm, filled with the clatter of pots and the shouts of cooks preparing the evening meal. Clara was assigned to a corner near the bread ovens, where she could be easily watched while helping with simple tasks. The head cook eyed her suspiciously but said nothing as evening fell, and the kitchen's bustle quieted. Servants began to whisper among themselves. Many remembered Clara's kindness in the village, how she had tended their sick children or shared her herb knowledge. Freely, "She made a poultice for my mother's joints last winter," one scullery maid murmured to another. "No witchcraft in it, just good healing sense." A young kitchen maid named Beth, her face round and kind, waited until the guard dozed in his chair before approaching Clara. From her apron pocket, she drew a small loaf of fresh bread and pressed it into Clara's hands. "The prince hasn't eaten since they brought you in," Beth whispered. "He paces his chambers like a caged lion, they say." The king had to order him confined to prevent another outburst. Clara's fingers trembled as they closed around the warm bread. "Thank you," she whispered back. "But please don't risk yourself for me." As night descended, the kitchens grew dark and quiet. The guard's snores echoed off the stone walls while Clara huddled in her corner, wrapped in a thin blanket a sympathetic cook had provided. In the darkness, she drew out her simple wooden rosary, its beads worn smooth by years of prayers. Tears fell silently as she moved from bead to bead, but her spirit remained unbroken. If death was to be her fate, she would face it as her father had, with truth and dignity as her shield. Let them call her witch or seductress. She knew what lay in her heart, and God knew it too. The rosary beads clicked softly as she prayed, each one a small comfort in the vast darkness of the castle kitchen dot in the shadows of the village church. Candlelight flickered across worried faces as neighbors gathered in hushed groups. The old monk, Brother Thomas, stood at the front, his weathered hands gripping the worn edges of the pulpit. "I knew her father," he declared, his voice carrying to every corner of the sacred space. "A braver soldier never served our kingdom. He gave his life protecting our king in battle, and now his daughter faces persecution." The villagers murmured, some nodding, others wringing their hands. Maria, the baker's wife, stepped forward. "Clara nursed my children through the fever last winter. She never asked for payment, not even a crust of bread, and she teaches the little ones their letters," added the blacksmith. "My own daughter can write her name now, thanks to her." Brother Thomas raised his hand for silence. "Tomorrow we go to the castle, all of us. We will speak truth to power, as Clara's father did before us. Let them see that common folk have honor too." Meanwhile, in the castle's private study, Prince Lucas stood before his father, the firelight casting dancing shadows on the rich tapestries. "Father, I beg you to see reason," he pleaded, his voice tight with emotion. "Clara is innocent of these charges." Count Drazel twisted truth into poison. The king sat heavily in his carved chair, looking older than his years. "My son, you do not understand the delicate balance we must maintain. The nobles grow restless. They whisper of weakness in our line, of common blood tainting the throne. And so we sacrifice an innocent woman to appease their pride." Lucas's hands clenched at his sides. "What kind of justice is that?" "The kind that keeps peace in our realm." The king's voice carried the weight of his crown. "Sometimes we must bear personal pain for the greater good. There is no good in this." "Greater or otherwise," Lucas said bitterly, turning away from his father's troubled gaze dot in his opulent chambers. Count Drazel sat at his mahogany desk, a satisfied smile playing across his thin lips as he reviewed the marriage contract before him. His quill scratched across expensive parchment, adding another clause to ensure his daughter's position would be unassailable. The scandal with the common woman had played perfectly into his hands. "Your Grace," his secretary murmured, "the preparations for tomorrow's tribunal are complete. All witnesses are properly motivated. Excellent. Drazel sealed the document with red wax, pressing his signet ring into it. Soon enough, my bloodline will be joined with the crown. The prince will have no choice but to see reason, as evening shadows lengthened across the castle grounds. Clara walked between two guards, her steps echoing in the stone corridor leading to the chapel. The guards had been kind enough, offering her water and speaking in gentle tones, but their hands never strayed from their sword hilts. Through a narrow window, barred with ancient iron, the last rays of sunlight streamed into the passage. Clara paused, drawn by movement in the courtyard below. There stood Prince Lucas, his face turned up toward her window, as if he had been waiting, hoping to catch this brief glimpse. Their eyes met across the distance. In that moment, all the walls and guards and noble schemes seemed to fade away. Clara pressed her hand against the cold stone, seeing in Lucas's gaze all the words they could not speak. Love shone there, fierce and true, alongside a despair that matched her own. One of the guards touched her arm gently. Miss, we must continue to the chapel. Clara nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. As she was led away, she carried with her the image of Lucas standing in the fading light, his shoulders straight despite the burden he carried, his eyes holding promises that might never be fulfilled. Morning light streamed through the towering windows of the great hall, casting long shadows across the packed chamber. Nobles in their silk finery pressed against villagers in homespun wool as the final judgment approached. The air hung heavy with tension and the mingled scents of beeswax candles and nervous sweat. Count Drazel stood before the throne, his velvet doublet gleaming with silver thread. His voice rang out, sharp and certain. Your Majesty, we must act swiftly. This common woman has bewitched the prince with her arts. Every day we delay judgment threatens the very foundation of noble order. The king sat rigid upon his throne, his face carved in stern lines. Beside him, scribes waited with quills poised over parchment, ready to record the sentence. Clara stood in the center of the hall, her simple dress and quiet dignity drawing all eyes. Though her hands trembled, she held her head high. Before the chief judge could unfurl the scroll of sentencing, Prince Lucas strode forward. The crowd parted like water before him. In one fluid motion, he knelt before the throne, his ceremonial sword laid at his father's feet. Father, his voice carried clear and strong through the hushed hall. Before God and these witnesses, I declare Clara as my chosen bride. If virtue counts for nothing in this realm, then I renounce all privilege of birth. Gasps rippled through the assembly. Count Drazel's face darkened with fury. This is madness, Your Majesty. He cannot, but others were moving now. Anna, the miller's wife, pushed forward from the crowd. My lord king, she called out, her voice wavering but determined. Last winter, when fever took our village, Clara nursed the sick day and night. She shared her own bread with hungry children. Came another voice, old Thomas the carpenter. When my roof collapsed in the storm, she organized the men to rebuild it. Working alongside them in the rain, more villagers pressed forward, each with a story. Clara teaching orphan children their letters, Clara defending a wrongly accused boy, Clara giving her winter cloak to a freezing traveler. The hall erupted with voices, nobles and commoners alike speaking over each other. Some defended ancient privilege, others praised Clara's kindness. The king raised his hand for silence, but the tide of testimony continued. She saved my grandson from drowning. Our family would have starved without her help. She speaks truth to power, is that not true nobility? The king's face showed the struggle within. He looked from his son's bowed head to Clara's steady gaze, then to the divided crowd before him. His fingers drummed against the throne's armrest as the weight of judgment pressed upon him God at last. His eyes settled on Count Drazel, who had grown pale with each new testimony. My lord Count, the king said, slowly, it seems we have heard much of virtue today. Yet I recall certain rumors about your own dealings. Bribes taken. Witnesses threatened. Count Drazel stepped back, sputtering. Your Majesty, surely you cannot credit common gossip. Guards, the king commanded, seize the count's papers. We shall examine all evidence of corruption. His stern gaze swept the hall. Before returning to his son and Clara, the assembly held its breath, watching their monarch wrestle between royal pride and the conscience awakened by so many voices raised in truth. The morning light caught the tears in the king's eyes as he studied the two young people before him, his son, willing to sacrifice everything for love and justice, and the common woman who had shown such uncommon nobility of spirit. The fate of not just two hearts, but perhaps his entire kingdom's future, hung upon his next words. The morning sun filled the great hall with golden light as the king slowly rose from his throne. His face, usually stern with royal authority, softened as he looked between his son and the humble village woman who had captured the prince's heart. The crowded hall fell silent, nobles and peasants alike holding their breath. I have spent many nights pondering the meaning of nobility, the king's voice carried, clear and strong through the chamber. And I find that true nobility shows itself not in titles or lands, but in the heart's courage and character. Count Drizel's face darkened as the king continued. This woman, Clara, daughter of a forgotten hero who once saved my own life in battle, has demonstrated more nobility in her simple acts of kindness than many who wear silk and golden chains. His gaze fell heavily on Count Drizel, whose shoulders stiffened. The charges against her are dismissed. Furthermore, the evidence reveals that Count Drizel himself orchestrated these false accusations through bribery and deceit. King's voice turned to steel. Such behavior has no place in this court. Count Drizel, you are stripped of your positions and banned from our presence. Guards stepped forward as Count Drizel spluttered in protest, his face flushed with rage and humiliation. They escorted him from the hall as whispers rustled through the crowd. Like wind through leaves, the king raised his hand for silence. As for my son's choice of bride, he paused, looking at Prince Lucas, who stood tall beside Clara, their fingers almost but not quite touching. I hereby grant my blessing and royal decree for their marriage. Let it stand as proof that true worth outweighs accidents of birth. Lucas turned to Clara, taking her work-roughened hand in his. Tears shimmered in her eyes as he whispered words meant only for her. It was never I who was too good for you. The tenderness in his voice carried to the nearest observers, who smiled at the pure love evident in his gaze. The great hall erupted in applause, the sound rolling like thunder through the vaulted ceiling. Nobles clapped alongside peasants, many wiping away tears at the triumph of true love over prejudice. Even the sternest courtiers found themselves moved by the sight of the prince and his chosen bride, standing together in the morning light in the weeks that followed. The banns were read on 3 consecutive Sundays in the village chapel, as tradition demanded. Each time, more people crowded the small church to hear the simple words that would unite their prince with a daughter of the village. Clara continued her work among the poor during this time, though now she did so with royal guards discreetly watching from a distance. On the wedding day, the village chapel overflowed with flowers and hope. By the prince's insistence, the ceremony was held not in the grand cathedral of the capital, but in the humble stone church where Clara had prayed since childhood. Nobles sat beside villagers on wooden pews worn smooth by generations of faithful worshippers. Clara wore a gown of cream silk, simple yet elegant, with her grandmother's lace veil. Lucas appeared in his formal military uniform, though without the usual excessive ornamentation of court dress. Their vows rang clear and true through the chapel, speaking of love, honor, and devotion beyond all worldly rank. After the ceremony, the newly wedded couple paused in the village square. A small child approached with flowers, stumbling slightly on the cobblestones. Without hesitation, Clara knelt beside the little one, her silk skirts pooling around her. Lucas bowed beside her, helping steady the child as tiny hands offered the bouquet. Tears of joy spilled down Clara's cheeks as she embraced the child. A gathered crowd, seeing their prince and new princess kneeling in the square's dust to comfort a common child, began calling out in joy. The people's bride. They cried, the name spreading through the square like wildfire as evening settled over the village. Candlelight began appearing in cottage windows, one by one, until the square glowed with hundreds of tiny flames. The chapel bells rang out across the valley, their joyous pealing echoing from the hills. It was a sound of triumph, of love's victory over prejudice, of hope for a future where worth would be measured by character rather than birth. If today's story reminded you of the quiet strength of love, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow we'll meet right here where love speaks softly and stays.